Good morning. That was quite a video. I didn't want to interrupt those drums in the least. Joe is being very good to me this morning. I am Shelley Carroll, and I do have all those worries. But we'll talk about those in the context of all cities today, not just in the context of the city of Toronto. As the budget chief and the vice chair of the Economic and Community Development Committee, the economic development part of that is my particular responsibility. So in that responsibility, it brings me here, and I'm so pleased to be welcoming you to the 17th edition of the Toronto Global Forum. Our government is in session this week. Most of you have been here throughout the week, and this morning is my first visit because of that, but certainly glad to be here. And it's Friday morning. For any of you who are from outside of Toronto, this is a perfect morning to be in downtown Toronto. We do have all the talent. We do have a very creative population, and a Friday morning in fall is when you will really find the true Torontonian creative sector. And you can tell the locals. We have a tradition here in Toronto amongst young creative men in Toronto. You will find that they have an ongoing citywide contest to see who on Casual Friday can wear cargo shorts for as long as possible into the cold weather. The month of November being the finals in that contest, and young women in our creative sector in Toronto have a similar contest, piling more and more creative scarves onto their necks. Because you don't break out your parka until Veterans Day, which is November 11th. You'll notice that as you travel around if you have some time to enjoy the city today. But we've got to talk about the more serious challenges that our cities are facing these days. We've been a long-standing supporter of this forum and happy to host because it does tackle these important conversations. We find these forums very impactful. They've really served the city well, and we hope they've served all of the participating cities well. We bring together these decision makers and leaders from around the world so that we can actually see partnerships forming and driving business to meet the needs of the people who dwell in our cities. Today, we're really going to discuss the urban dynamics in today's context. Global cities like Toronto are facing a constant need for renewal and innovation. That's why it's so important to keep nurturing that talent and innovation that has been a theme in order to face those challenges. And we have with us a very good panel today. These are people who in their particular roles are facing all of the things we face. Things like climate resilience, executing the projects that help us adapt and mitigate those challenges that affords. I know there are lots of questions floating around given the last couple of days' discussion, and we're going to tackle some very big general ones here, and then hopefully you'll be able to follow them up afterwards when we jump down off this podium. We hope that people will engage further in the contest. So want to introduce the panel to you very quickly. First of all, in the center of this group is John Beck, who, if you haven't met him, John is the founder and the chairman of Aecon Group. That's a group very well known to any city, and he's here with us today. Mr. Beck has had 50 years experience in the construction industry, both in Canada and internationally, and he's a seasoned corporate leader in heavy civil projects, but also a real leader and at one point an outlier in public-private partnerships to meet public good in things such as transit systems, toll roads in the places where those work, the development of airports to meet global needs. I'm also pleased to have with us an interesting partner in this conversation. Daniel Bernhard, down at the end, is the CEO of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. It's an amazing national charity that helps immigrants become citizens. Daniel's the first-generation Canadian who's dedicated his career to the public. He's led and advised charities, foundations, and government agencies in North America, Europe, and the Middle East. That may that may come up painfully today. His work has been remarkably creative. Transformational programs have come out of his work that really truly have met the public good in global cities. And finally, immediately to my left is RJ Steenstra. He's the president and CEO of PortsToronto. PortsToronto is the owner and operator of Billy Bishop Airport. I don't know how many of you arrived via Billy Bishop, and also responsible for the Marine Port of Toronto and some other very strategic waterfront assets. RJ is also the chair of Airports Council International for North America, and he sits on its global board. And this gives him, I think, a unique perspective on the performance, recovery, and the ambitions of global cities at this particular post-pandemic time. RJ is recognized for his smart and dynamic decisions that have moved businesses forward in challenging times. So we're going to get right down to it, gentlemen. And I'll maybe start with you, RJ, because partly because you're sitting closest to me. I'm going to start with RJ, but then I'm going to ask if the others have some thoughts on this too. And the big question, of course, is what are some of the challenges that are being encountered by global cities today? And here, I think we can speak to historic challenges as well. Are there lessons to be learned? Did we meet them? And can they help us deal with some of the issues we have now in a challenging economy and having come out of a world event such as the pandemic? Are there lessons to be learned from some of our past solutions to those challenges? Or are these unprecedented times and we're just going to have to come up with new solutions? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so let me just start. I think what's really important is how do we define a global city? And of course, it's not just about geography and how large the city is and the population, but it's also about whether transnational corporations are in our city, whether we have transportation links that are connecting to other global cities, which of course in Toronto we do. It's a multitude of things. Tourism. Do tourists believe that this is a destination? That sort of is another way to look at whether we're a global city. On all of those things, I would say Toronto is doing exceptionally well and has done exceptionally well. However, we have some significant challenges. One, the downtown core is not back to where it was in 2019, 2018, and we need to really focus on how we do that, how we get people back into downtown. And as you mentioned, yes, it's busy during the week, not busy as it used to be, but busy during the week, and then the weekend things get much more quiet. So how are we facilitating people to come down and ensure that they enjoy the downtown core as a location? Affordability continues to be a challenge for the city, and we see that with the mandate of our new mayor in terms of how do we create opportunities for young people, but also existing residents that live here in Toronto. So we have some big challenges. Transportation is another one, and when we think about the connectivity, as I mentioned, which defines a global city, we've got to ensure that we continue to grow our ability to connect cities to Toronto and ensure that that's followed with trade and investment attraction and tourism. So when we want to fill the city with people over the weekend, we need to ensure that they can get to the city. So Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport obviously is a critical element in that, and it has to be viewed as a lever to help the economy, to help productivity, to ensure that we're moving forward as well. The Port of Toronto is another lever that needs to be utilized as an asset for the city so that we can get back to where we were, and in fact beyond that, because I think things are changing so dramatically. So those would be certainly my comments to open up.
And it's difficult. We've seen a hollowing out. If we go all the way back, maybe John and I will remember this. If we go all the way back to a point in the 80s or certainly the early 90s, that hollowing out in American cities and Canadian cities of the downtown core, and then they came back. What did we do that revitalized downtown cores, and can it work for us now, or do we have to do something different? Yeah.
You ask me?
Yeah.
Well, it's a complicated situation because technology has made it so easy and so okay to work at a distance and remotely, that to reinvent the downtown core by bringing office workers in is going to be a big challenge. So I think there'll have to be a recycling, and we've seen some of that already, of space, first class space that exists, into what is dramatically needed right now, which is housing. And there has to be a way to convert one to the other. I remember a time when we converted housing to offices.
Yes.
And I think the opposite may be true. I think that's definitely one of the solutions. The other one, and I'll just add a little bit to what was said earlier about the global city, is culture. And to the extent that you can continue to encourage cultural activity and sort of a bubbling up of more and more of the arts writ large, that'll attract people into the city more than they have so far. I think that's another one. But I'll come back to the transportation one, and the and we were in the construction business, so we were living both sides of that. We're guilty, and at the same time we're suffering, like everyone else is. And that is, clearly, we need more transit. We need more integrated transit systems. We need more underground transit systems
Yes.
to complement everything that we're doing in terms of the bicycle lanes and the facility for people to move around and get to work, because traffic is just not just in Toronto, but all the global cities around the world. It's an intractable problem. And the only way is all of these mechanisms that we have, and maybe, and I know you've been considering it, congestion pricing for people who come into the city.
Yes.
It's worked in other places.
We have been considering it, but it's sort of it's the third rail of politics. It often takes several tries for a city to get there. Daniel, I wonder if we could think of all of this in the context of new populations. RJ said at the beginning, global city doesn't always mean big city. And we're certainly seeing in Canada, as new populations arrive, they aren't all staying in Toronto. So some of the challenges we face with an influx of population is happening in cities that may have opportunity. There may be a transnational company there, and so there's opportunity in a place like Kitchener-Waterloo, a much smaller city, and yet starting to feel global, including the fact that people emigrating to Canada or seeking asylum in Canada are going to those communities as well, making them seem more like global cities. How do we meet the challenge of that influx in cities of varying sizes across the country?
That's a great question. I think that, they often say where you stand depends on where you sit. And where I sit is in a charitable organization that is trying to help newcomers to become citizens, because we don't believe inherently that immigration is a challenge. We actually think that it's a humongous opportunity for Canada. And I would actually go as far as to say the only way through a lot of these challenges that you're talking about in terms of rebuilding, transit construction, et cetera, because what immigration provides is renewal. And for people who are not from Toronto, just to give you a sense, this city, this region right now is adding about 10,000 people a month. It's an unprecedented rate of growth. And at the same time,
Tell me about it.
yeah, it's an unprecedented rate of growth. And I think the biggest challenge that we face, I think, is actually our own mentality, that we want to be a high growth and a low growth city at the same time. I want to live in a detached house 5 minutes from downtown and at the same time have a whole bunch of new people coming in. And so we need to sort of grow into this stature. And I think if we do, the opportunities are fantastic. There are talented people from around the world who want to make our home their home. They bring connections to business around the world. They bring connections to capital around the world. And they bring new ideas and new ways of doing things on how to build things less expensively, on how to deliver healthcare at equal quality at lower prices. There are other countries that have figured this out. And if we can harness this asset, then this type of renewal, this type of regeneration that you're speaking about is completely possible. And I think Canada wins the next 100 years if we can make sure that there's an environment in which people can contribute to their full potential. Right now, I worry that that's not the case. And so our organization, both from discussions like this one and talking about policy and workforce and all that kind of stuff, but also making sure that people can have fun and enjoy themselves here. Our key program is an app that allows newcomers to Canada to enjoy over 1,400 of our best culture and nature attractions for free, plus discounts at sports matches, travel, Air Canada. Eric's from Air Canada is here. They offer a fantastic discount via rail, etc. Because we think that people who love it here will stay and contribute. And one of the worrying signs we're seeing is that actually many immigrants are now starting to reconsider not just Toronto, but Canada, and move on from the country. So when you talk about a global city, we are by definition a global city. We have people from around the globe who are coming here. Are we going to consider it a challenge? Or are we going to see this as the strongest asset and Canada's unique advantage and make the most of it? I think that's the challenge in front of us. And I think we've got a lot going for us.
I want to follow up on something you said there. Because my next question was going to be, what are some of the things that innovations that could really revolutionize urban life, could really improve city life? And you talked about sometimes new Canadians bring those ideas with them, but the Canadian mindset is often, and I say Canadian because I've lived in other cities as well. It's not unique to Toronto, but the feeling is, if we go back a few decades, the feeling was, okay, get here and then you must assimilate and learn ways of doing things. And so we have a tendency not to listen. If someone comes from afar and says, here's the way we did this where I've come from, this could really improve the way this emergency room flows. Here's how I did it in Kenya with very few resources, things like that. And we weren't willing to listen. Are there things we should be listening to that are true innovations that really could revolutionize the systems in cities as we deal with growth? Yeah.
I'm not an expert in healthcare delivery by any stretch of the imagination, but I know that there are other countries that have similar life expectancy and health outcomes to us that spend far less per person. I'm sure in construction and infrastructure, you have the same situation, and part of that might be methods, part of that might be policy and governance and regulation. But there are definitely better ways to do things than we're doing them. Of course there are. And if you can think about it this way, to use a very Canadian metaphor, if you're playing, pickup hockey as a kid, we used to pick teams, hands up, used to pick sticks. Remember that? So everyone, right? You'd all throw your hockey stick in the middle. Everyone would do that. And then two team captains would close their eyes and pick from the pile and throw them here and throw them there. And that's how you'd be able to pick your team. If you're picking your team from the, 2 million people that are in front of you, you can do okay. If you're picking your team from the 7 billion that are in the world, then your selection is just way better. And it's just the math. It's just the stats. It's going to work. You're going to get people who have different ideas. And this is new Canadians, new energy, new ideas. It makes all the difference. If we stop viewing immigration as about diversity and compassion and start viewing it instead about ambition and achievement and possibility and opportunity, I think we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of the talent that's here.
I would add to that something that really, because it happened to my father when our family immigrated. These people have skills. In some cases, if we're talking about engineers, they have diplomas. If you talk about nurses, they have their certifications. And so many organizations today block the admission of these people until certain things happen and until exams and everything else. When they're fully qualified, and if there was some kind of accelerator or support system to allow that, so many taxi drivers today are graduate engineers that can't practice and so on. That would add a lot of quality to the immigration opportunities that will contribute to society sooner.
Well, maybe I should take some of the criticism as a member of government in terms of, the types of innovations that can come from ideas that are coming from new Canadians or from immigrants to any city, but also a lot of innovation comes from the private sector. Are we listening when the private sector wants to bring to a public-private partnership? Here's a way to do this that would be more efficient.
Right.
May take some regulative change, but are you listening? We can really improve things. Are we listening when the private sector walks in the door of government with an innovation? And are we listening enough?
So I'll be very polite and say,
It's okay. I can
It's a good
take.
question.
say not always.
A work in progress.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would say flat no. But I mean, I won't say that. So I'll give you an example. When we bid work, and I'm going to take the City of Toronto, which is very sensitive to the transparent bidding process, which I respect. And it's, here are the specifications. Here's what we want you to do. Don't deviate from that. Here's the price. Well, we say, just a second now, if we did this, there would be an advantage to the reduction of emissions. There'd be a climate change effect, positive one. Could we propose that? And by the way, it would be cheaper. The answer is no.
Now I'm listening.
The answer is no.
Well, then I have to improve on that, don't I?
And the reason it's no is we have a process, and as soon as we start to deviate from that process, it becomes a subjective decision making as opposed to something that's clear cut. I say with all due respect, it's at every level of government. It's not just the city, but the province and the federal governments have not yet got their heads around the idea that there could be creative solutions from the private sector which benefit all around. Although there's a little bit of evolution now where bidders are now being selected through a system called the progressive design build process as opposed to the lump sum bid. And those processes mean that a government agency will select a bidder based almost more on, like all beauty contest qualifications, and then work together with that to optimize, to pick up those opportunities about emissions and about and a more efficient way to do things or to avoid problems, and then close in on a fixed price. So that's evolving right now.
Right.
And if I might add, I think it's a really important, when we think about, we were just talking about ideas and how we become more creative. It's within us all to be thinking about things differently. And so when we look at the waterfront in Toronto, have we really activated the water as a transportation network? We haven't. When we look at, so that's not helping congestion into and out of downtown Toronto. So can we do things differently? You look at a city like Medellin, who in Colombia, which went through a massive transformation. And rather than looking at more traditional means like a subway or streetcars for moving people in and out of the downtown and across the city, they went to a massive gondola network, right? Which was not inexpensive, but more inexpensive certainly than putting in a subway, and connected the entire city through a gondola system and moved people back into the downtown core. They also invested in an arts center. And I would say, in Toronto, we've got so many key ingredients that, for example, the Harbourfront Center as a world-renowned center of the arts,
Yes.
right on the waterfront. But a lot of people, even in Toronto, don't know that it exists or don't know what kind of programs they have. We've got, amazing facilities. The CN Tower is an attraction. We need to do more of those things to ensure that people come back to the city, because it's those layers. It's obviously jobs. It's obviously housing. But it's the layers that make a city great. And when we go to a city that is great, you feel it immediately.
Yes.
You can't put your finger on it, but it's there, and it's likely because they have all the layers of complexity and interest and arts and transportation and housing and restaurants and productivity. The engines of the economy are located in their downtown cores. I mean, we can attract people to live downtown, but they still need somewhere to work and earn livings, right? And some of that will go online and is going online as things shift in our economy. But we just have to think about things in a different way and put that creativity to work.
It feels a lot like revolution. We in City of Toronto, we're now developing an update of our economic development plan, and there's a sort of dynamic tension between some of the people at the table. We're sort of revolutionizing the world of work, and that word can sometimes be negative and sometimes positive. Revolutionize. Some are saying, shouldn't governments make laws that everyone has to come back to work? Wouldn't that solve everything? Others are saying they're not coming back, so develop a new core around that. And yet, I don't know that we're comparing notes from one city to the next to figure out how that's done yet. We know that in New York City, for instance, the government and the mayor, probably because he was new at the time, Mayor Adams in New York City sort of came out at the end of the pandemic and was a new energy, and so they immediately had a recovery plan. But I don't know that we talk to each other and check in. Is this working nearly enough? Is that solving your problems? If not, what are we doing? How did we solve the problem? That I think would be the true revolution. Are we comparing notes enough? We seem to be traveling as personal travel tourists, but not so much as business and idea tourists. That doesn't seem to be happening. Do we need to do that more?
Well, I would, yes, absolutely. And I would actually say that what ends up happening on an investment attraction, for example, most of the time, people that are coming in first as tourists, and then they look at the investment opportunity. So they actually come in as a visitor and look at the opportunities or realize that there are opportunities, whether it's location, access to high educated labor, or whatever the situation is, and then they go back and make decisions about whether Toronto might be a good location for their business. But then all the other factors come in to the equation. So I think we should be encouraging and finding more ways to create visitation into the city, all aspects of the city, not just the downtown core, all aspects of the city, and that will help move things forward.
John, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I just thinking about what other cities have been doing, and I've visited some of them. Maybe the city or its various parts of that, maybe direct or indirect relationships with other organizations, could think about creating more activity in the downtown core, and by inventing things that could happen more than they happen today. Not necessarily different, but just more of that. Luminato is wonderful. The Nuit Blanche is wonderful. More and more and more of that to bring people more into the downtown core during the day as well as nights and weekends.
Yes.
But who made those things, right? I mean, the city didn't make those things directly, right? I mean, those were done by civil society. They were done spontaneously. And so people will figure it out. I mean, you talk about, are we comparing notes with other cities, with other, with places around the world? Okay, quick poll. Please raise your hand if you do not live in Toronto. Okay, pretty good. Now, keep your hand up, please, if you do not live in Canada. All right, so we have a few, but we have people from, they're already here.
Yeah.
The assets are already here. If we open ourselves to the idea that we can't control everything,
yes,
but that we can create space for innovation, which means just sort of letting go a little bit, I give an example. I used to live near Trinity Bellwoods Park, right? And that's not a park, it's a bar. Doesn't matter what you call it. Okay? It's just what it is. And the city said, well, should we allow it to be a bar? It is a bar already. Forget it. And so the fear to just grow into itself is something that I worry about in Toronto and I worry about in Canada. And the fear of innovation as being risky is also something I worry about. Like, just to give you an example, so our canoe pass, that free culture pass that I talked about, CANOO, download it if you want to check it out. CN Tower, all these cultural things you mentioned are all included there. We facilitated 62,000 free visits for newcomers and their families just in the month of August. Our organization now serves more people than all other immigrant serving organizations in the country for less than 0.5% of the cost. Trying to get rewarded for success and scale this up and working with government has been an excruciating challenge, and I lost the 1 or 2 hairs I had left in the process of doing that, and it's still not done. So innovation, change, the challenges of incumbency, the defense that incumbents put up, these are real barriers because the assets are already here. The innovation, the creativity, the energy, it's already here if we're just willing to let it happen. That's my personal view.
Yes, you're so right. I resemble that remark. Although I will take credit. I was the mover of the motion to finally have a pilot to see if the world would come to an end if we had drinking in parks legalized.
And the sign, the huge sign.
And it was largely because that was the only way to actually bring council along. There was a wonderful old councillor, a real revolutionary thinker, gone way too early in life. His name was Dan Leckie, and he once said, you're going to love municipal government. You can do anything you want in municipal government. You just have to accept the fact that it's all done through creeping incrementalism. And we embody that in this particular global city. But that came to my mind and I thought, okay, can we tippy toe into this? Would that help you people? So that was how the pilot was born and the giant sign.
I have a
Yes.
question. These 62,000 people you mentioned that came in August, how many of them had jobs?
That's a good question. We know that the members of our pass tend to be disproportionately employed, but we can't ask them those things. Privacy laws preclude us from doing so. I think that general statistics show us that people do have jobs, but they have jobs below their level of contribution. So just as a simple example, you mentioned healthcare. There are an estimated 10,000 people in the province of Ontario who have passed all of their Canadian medical accreditation exams and who are not working as doctors. The doctor shortage that we have, that everyone complains about, it doesn't exist. It's not real. It's bureaucratic, 100% in nature. So we see a lot of that. And when you read in the paper about, immigration doesn't help GDP per capita and productivity, it makes me so furious because, if you're driving a taxi, what's your GDP contribution? And if you're doing heart surgery, your GDP contribution is way more, or engineering, or, electricity, plumbers, etc. So we're not using people to their full capacity, and they're leaving increasingly. We have a study that will be coming out in a couple of weeks showing that onward migration, immigrants who come and then say thanks but no thanks, has been steadily growing over decades, but it's been spiking in recent years. It's a real threat to Canada's prosperity.
Crazy. Makes no sense at all. I can't
So
believe
we have time for the loaded question. It may take up the entire rest of the panel.
Okay.
But you're in Toronto, so we can't discuss how we're going to meet the challenges of the future without talking about AI. We're actually very proud of the fact that what we see are a lot of companies that are based in the city are transnationals. As they set up their AI departments, are setting them up in Toronto. A major one is we'll be making that announcement next month. But where does that fit in here? I don't know, how many people have actually employed it? How many people are using AI in their enterprises now? There you go. So are we using it to its full extent? Are we making sure that the human side of it, are we making sure that our talent is ready for that and able to use it as opposed to be displaced by it? Um, what we see is it coming into creativity, coming into corporations. I actually used it a couple of times for in an HR exercise, a difficult situation. I actually used it to help me create the document I needed to be able to sit down between myself and the staff member. And it was great. It solved the issue that I had, but it also scared the life out of me because I thought, this is beyond me. This is too powerful. But is it? How do we take that and turn that to this challenge? We're facing a difficult world economy. We are all recovering from that world event, the pandemic. Is it perfectly timed that this is now coming into use? And can we make sure that humans get to use it and continue to be productive?
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert in any way on AI, but I do believe that we have the ability to harness it in a way that's productive and helpful to society and to business and to our citizens. And I think there were 60 Minutes actually just did a story on AI with one of the founding fathers of AI, and he said something quite ominous in terms of the fact that AI will supersede human thinking, and showed it by Google's already worked on two robots, but for lack of a better term, that were playing soccer. They were not programmed to play soccer. They were adjusting and in large ways thinking about how to react to where the ball was and how to score. And when you watch that, and again, this is 60 Minutes, and obviously they have a story to tell. But I was like, that is very, very interesting, challenging, and a little bit scary, to be quite honest. So the challenge for us, I think, as society and in global cities and here in Toronto, and certainly in the airport world, we're always looking at how do we create flexibility in our processes to adapt and serve the passenger better and ultimately the economy in a better way. But what does that mean? So I think it's going to be a very useful. It's already here. It's very powerful. It's going to be helpful. It's how do we ensure that it doesn't get too far out ahead of us? And I think regulation, and that's where government comes into the equation. And like anything new, we trial it out, we see where it goes, and then regulation has to come in and ensure that it's meeting the needs of society broadly. And so that's sort of the view that I take with it. So,
John, is Aecon already employing AI and bringing it with them in the tender process and being told no?
Very cautiously, step by step. Of course, we fully endorse and we sort of accept, and we're going to be living with AI as it grows and develops. I would say that the fears will dissipate over time as we all get more comfortable with it. The fears that will overtake us, I think we're far away from that. There's lots of arguments, notwithstanding the soccer game. I think there's lots of arguments that say, yes, reactive, but never to the point of being creative in advance of human capacity, but certainly extremely powerful. So cautiously, but absolutely, yes, step by step.
Yes. Is there potential here, Daniel, for the more migrant populations while this innovation is taking hold in cities? While you're on the move, are you able to skill up to be able to use AI in your working life, or is that something that we have to be ready to train as people arrive in Toronto?
Ooh, oh boy, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think to your bigger question about, should we be afraid, etc. I mean, I have two small children, so I'm like really rooting for the future of human survival. That's like something I really
Yeah.
to happen. And we talked about over governance in some respects, and I think the frustrating imbalance that we see in cities like Toronto are a good example of that, especially within Canada, is really overbearing governance on kind of silly pedantic things, and then a total absence of attention from big things that are important. Like in Canada, we now have cities that burn and flood simultaneously.
Yeah.
Insurance premiums to rebuild in those places have gone through the roof, and many of them are becoming uninsurable. We just rebuild the places afterwards. Like no one's talking about how do we move 1 million people to higher ground, let alone what's going to happen when the rest of the world runs out of drinking water, or places like, seaside places. You've heard the seas are rising, so I'm thinking about places like Mumbai, Shanghai, Manhattan, Miami, that will be, underwater. We happen to have a temperate climate and a lot of fresh water. We're not thinking about how to deal with a huge influx of people to be able to do that. Now, cities like Thompson, Manitoba, et cetera, have an opportunity to build entirely from scratch. We can do this all again. We can respect Indigenous rights. We can figure out how to build in a climate-friendly way, transit-friendly way. But we're not thinking about these things. We're worried about, whether cyclists are speeding in High Park. Okay?
Yes.
So we're missing the attention. I think AI is another one of these things. Like this has a huge threat to displace human labor, the distribution of income, our ability to buy things. And we seem to be completely asleep at the wheel. At the same time, you talk about skills. Most people who come to Canada, it's really hard to immigrate to Canada. If you want to be a permanent resident, if you are like older than 35, it's really, really difficult to be a principal economic applicant. You need to have some pretty advanced education. And the group that's growing fast, international students, most of those people already have a degree. Here's the ugly reality of it. International students, for the most part, are not coming here to study. They're coming as a pathway to immigration. And many of them have skills in IT and in engineering that we don't put to good use like anywhere else. But if you look at any software company, just go walk into the room where the software engineers sit. Almost all of them come from outside of Canada. So again, this might be something where we can use our advantage as an opening and welcoming society to quickly bring in the skills that we need.
Yes.
On the governance side, on the engineering side, to figure this out and win if we weren't so afraid of winning all the time. And I think that's, it's just another case in point. We need to focus on the important stuff and recognize that most of the answers are already here.
It's funny you should say that. That it seems to me like a very Toronto thing. We are afraid of winning. But what do you see in other cities? Or is that unique to us? Or is that
I would say it's a Canadian thing.
A thing that comes with size?
Yeah.
It's a Canadian thing.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's Canadian. I would say that we don't have, just to Daniel's point, I don't think we have a global view. We have a very somewhat inward view, and largely because we're blessed as a country with natural resources, and we can sell those commodities on the market. Where you go to countries, I was at a conference not long ago in South Korea, and I've lived in South Korea, and you look at what they're doing, their focus on their people and their ability to drive knowledge forward. Technology, innovation, AI systems. Sure, they have a certain level of manufacturing base, and but those things are transitioning really quickly. They have to rely on their people. They ensure that South Koreans have English language skills, have education abroad or high levels in their own country. And I think we in Canada have less of a global view. We're more inward focused and self-reliant. And I would say that that's generally across the country.
I can add to that. I think
Yes.
the avoidance of risk and more blending in is a. I had a personal experience. I was on the board of the Canadian Opera Company when they decided to build a new opera house on University in Queen.
Yes.
And we had selected Frank Gehry as a fantastic international architect, starchitect. And we were starting the process when there was a pushback, not from the city, but from the conservative part of the board, which said, well, we need to blend in more. This is going to be just too crazy, and who knows where it's going to end and all that. And we ended up with a very nice looking opera house. Some people call it a car dealership from the outside. But wonderful, wonderful acoustics on the inside. But here was a chance to put Toronto on the world map like Sydney did with their opera house.
Yeah.
And we missed that chance.
But that one wasn't our fault. You said that
No.
after the board.
No.
I don't have to take the blame for that one. Phew. Although I will take the blame for, speaking of taking risks, the at the end of that whole process, there was a ridiculous argument with the city that frustrated me greatly, and I had a temper tantrum about it. The vision had been to connect to the subway inside the hall. And then when that time came, everyone forgot that was the commitment. And the task of getting that done was as arduous as building the entire building.
I agree.
It was, and so we've got to start to get that right. So we're going to run out of time to call ourselves a global city unless we start thinking globally. It's basically what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
We're bringing people from around the globe and then not thinking globally.
Right.
Take risk and see what works.
And to your last point about the government not being the sole problem, like I completely agree with that. I mean, we've been talking about governance, but underemployment has as much to do with employers as it does, with government. There's no law that says that thou shalt not hire HR or marketing executives at their adequate level of seniority and expertise. Doctors and nurses, we focus on that because they're regulated, but there's a whole unregulated workforce that's also underemployed. So as business leaders, we have a lot to do with this. And I would encourage people to say, look at your competitive edge. If you're leaving money on the table because you can't produce, because you can't sell, because you can't manufacture, you can't build, because you're doing the same thing as your competitors are doing, because you're hiring from the same labor pool as your competitors, we have this amazing advantage of a huge number of skilled and underemployed people. Like, go for it. Don't do it to be nice. Don't do it to be diverse. Don't do it, for some sense of obligation. Do it to make money. Do it to build a society. And the government can't do all that stuff. It's a dispositional thing that, like RJ was saying, and I think that applies beyond government as well.
Yes.
Our management team at Aecon, not one was born in Canada.
Really?
Just to give you an idea of, what we've been able,
and that's a huge advantage, I'm sure.
We're able to do. And then the flip side of that is those that are overqualified but can't be. Then there's the underqualified ones and the training programs that we've launched, both disadvantaged young kids, Black, Aboriginal, and then women, all trying to bring them all into the workforce, the construction workforce. It's a huge effort which is going on and making progress.
Yeah,
that needs to be showcased so that everyone else in the cluster takes your lead. Although I will say this, I started this talking about how you could, if you want to pick out a local Toronto young creative when you're walking around today, that's a sector that is leading the way in that respect. We're very proud of our film sector. $2.5 billion. We and the Premier share the goal of getting that to $5 billion in terms of business. And for many years, my husband was a beneficiary of the fact that the adage "Oscar so white" actually is true. The unions in that business were familial based. Your father got you into the union. Your uncle got you into the union. And so there was no diversity in that business. But young people have taken the bull by the horns and said, then we will develop our product and our projects outside of that regime and then sell it in. And as a result, that has opened things up so that even within the unions, people are now setting the goal that we need to have a reflective BIPOC workforce. And out of that, we'll also end up with much more relatable product, which means we will probably sell it more globally. And we see that happening here at a slower pace, but but it has actually taken hold in Hollywood through, high profile exercises like Project Greenlight and such, sort of guilted people into saying we have to open up our business. And so if we want to take a cue from the creative sector, because it is so visible, a place like Aecon is now leading the way in a very industrial place. And if those are public-private partnerships, you'll have an influence on government in that respect as well. That's a benefit to every one of your clients. It's an experience we can jump on a plane at Billy Bishop and take around the entire oeuvre of all their destinations. And challenges.
And I think it's to your point, Shelley, it's not one and done. We have to constantly be reinventing and relooking at the things that we're investing in and the things that we're creating, but also making sure that we're looking also in the back mirror in the sense that, so for example, the film industry, about $2.5 billion economic contribution to the city of Toronto. But Billy Bishop alone, for example, is equal to that and growing quickly to 4 billion. So how do we make sure that, and this was my point to start with, was leveraging the assets that we already have, Harborfront Center, the CN Tower, and then obviously the infrastructure, and harnessing those things to move forward. And I think Billy Bishop is an amazing model, actually, even unique in the country for private-public partnership investments. So our tunnel, which people use to access the airport, was a private-public partnership, right?
Big fan of the tunnel.
Absolutely. Lots of people are, right? Our partnership with Newport Aviation, which owns and operates our terminal on Billy Bishop Airport, is a unique model in Canada that actually is being utilized more and more in a global setting, as it's challenging to continue to grow infrastructure and assets to serve the community. But we also have to be very reflective on how does innovation and system changes be incorporated into that process. So it's not just about building, it's about using what we have more efficiently, more effectively, and ultimately driving forward. So I think holistically, we can't just, as a city, say, we've got this, and this, and one and done, let's go, and leave it at that. We've constantly got to be looking forward and a little bit backwards to say, hey, what do we have? What haven't we maximized? And how do we keep moving forward? And I'm really optimistic about the city of Toronto and where it's headed in the future.
That is a great final thought. Are you similarly optimistic, gentlemen?
Absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, yeah. And I think the focus, the focus has to be on that. I mean, it's not just us talking, but okay, what are we going to actually do?
Yeah,
absolutely.
One a month for the next 12 months.
Daniel wants to see you do more.
No, I don't want to see you do more. I think that I want to applaud you for the program you talked about upskilling not only newcomers, but also everybody, because I think this highlights the urgency, the survival need. I mean, Canada needs to build, what do they say now, like an extra 2.3 million homes about what we're doing by 2030. And yet by 2028, between 2021 and 2028, 700,000 skilled tradespeople will leave the workforce due to retirement. Mm-hmm. These places will not build themselves. And I think this highlights the risk that we often don't think about in Canada, about what could go wrong. I think we just assume that our prosperity will be perpetual.
That's right.
And if you asked people 100 years ago whether they wanted to go to Canada or Argentina, I think a lot of them would have picked Argentina. They had ample agricultural land, the weather was nice, there was some good wine, there's all new opera houses and railroads and all that kind of stuff. And that country is no longer in such a state of good repair. And that can happen here. The houses can get built, but they can also not get built. The downtown can be renewed, but it can also not be renewed. Right. And I think people need to realize that this is not guaranteed. This wealth that we have is not guaranteed. We need to renew it. And Canada's history has always been one of recreating itself by bringing people from around the world who become citizens, who become owners, full contributors of the team. If we can't do that again, then we have a problem. And so all the pieces are here. And, John's mentioned a program. That's what we all need to do. And at bigger scale, government can help them do more of that. But there's a downside here too, and I just want to raise the urgency of this. It is very important that we can make the most, that we can be open to the world and all it brings us, because there is an or else. which we don't like to talk about, but it's there. It's there. At the same time, there's a huge opportunity. So we seem to be at a tipping point.
That is, I think, an excellent place to wrap up. I want to thank these gentlemen. Because I was in council all week and couldn't be here, I was saying what a treat for me to get to, in one fell swoop, just pick the brains of some of the most important people in the whole Toronto Global Forum sitting on a stage. I want to thank you, RJ, John Beck, and Daniel Bernhard. Thank you so much for your thoughts. I think we're now all firing on all synapses. Will that do, Joe?